Inside the matte black armored car, President Vladimir Putin sat in silence, his hands clasped on his thighs, his once piercing eyes now subdued, sinking into an undefined void. The long, dark coat draped over his figure could not hide the fleeting weariness on a face that had long maintained a hardened expression. The steady drumming of rain on the car windows played like a wordless, melancholic tune, blending with his slow, measured breathing. "Turn on to the narrow road," he suddenly ordered, his deep but decisive voice breaking the silence within the vehicle. The driver, a middle-aged man with calloused hands gripping the steering wheel, nodded without a word. He was accustomed to such brief orders. Next to Putin, a young bodyguard sat upright, his keen eyes scanning the rain outside, his hand resting on a small briefcase containing communication equipment. "Sir, the schedule," the young man began, but a subtle wave of Putin's hand silenced him. "I want peace," Putin said, his tone low, yet enough to make every other sound in the car fade away. No one dared to object. The vehicle veered off the main road, gliding past brightly lit skyscrapers into an older, more worn-out neighborhood. Narrow, muddy, and dimly lit alleys appeared. The weak streetlights flickered as though about to extinguish. Putin leaned forward, peering through the bulletproof glass. Outside, the world seemed to slow down. There were no blaring horns, no bustling crowds, only the rain and solitary figures huddled under awnings. He sighed, a quiet breath hardly audible, and his mind churned with restless thoughts. Power, the very power he held, felt like an immense burden. Every decision he made could alter the fate of millions, redraw the map of the world. Yet tonight, amid the cold rain, he asked himself something rare, something he hardly allowed himself to ponder. Did he truly understand the people out there? Those without names in secret reports, absent from Kremlin's closed-door meetings? How did they live? What did they need? These silent questions drifted away, unanswered, merging with the incessant patter of the rain. The car slowed as it passed through an old neighborhood where low buildings stood shoulder to shoulder, their walls weathered by time. Under the dim streetlight, a dilapidated bus stop came into view. The rusty tin roof creaked with every gust of wind, and the rainwater streamed through holes, pooling into murky puddles on the ground. Unconsciously, Putin looked out, his eyes pausing. There, a young girl stood alone under the weak yellow light. Soaked from head to toe, her thin jacket clung to her body, and her hands hugged a tattered cloth bag. Rain streamed down her face, yet she made no move to wipe it away. She simply stood still, her shoulders trembling slightly in the biting cold. Her gaze was fixed into the distance, as if waiting for something, or perhaps resigned to nothing at all. The silent acceptance of someone utterly exhausted. "Slow down," Putin ordered. His voice was low but clear. The driver gently applied the brake, and the car slowed to nearly a stop. The bodyguard beside him turned his head slightly, worry clear in his eyes. "Sir, we shouldn't linger here. This area," he began, but Putin waved him off again. "I want to see," he said, his eyes never leaving the girl. The bodyguard fell silent, though his grip on the briefcase tightened as if ready to act at any moment. The girl, small and fragile in the rain, held something about her that kept Putin's gaze fixed. Perhaps it was the determined way she stood, or the unyielding look in her eyes that betrayed no trace of bitterness despite the soaking rain. Furrowing his brows, he tried to understand what had captivated him so. He did not know that, in just a few seconds, a scene would unfold that would change everything. Then, like a flash of lightning tearing through the night, the girl suddenly dashed from the bus stop. Barefoot, she ran through the murky puddles. The bag nearly slipped from her grasp, but she clutched it tightly. Putin squinted, trying to follow her. She ran toward a small figure in the distance, a young boy seated in a wheelchair, about several dozen meters away. The old creaky wheelchair, its wheels often stuck in the mud, revealed a boy struggling to push himself out of a puddle, his frail hands trembling from cold and fatigue. Yet all his efforts were in vain, as the rain continued unabated, as if determined to drown them both in darkness. The girl knelt beside the boy, disregarding the filthy water that reached above her knees. The bag slipped to the ground and soaked instantly, but she paid it no mind. Placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, her voice rang out gently, yet firmly amid the rain. "Don't be afraid, I'll help you." The boy looked up, his wide, tear-filled eyes unable to tell if they were from rain or sorrow. Who are you? He whispered weakly. The girl smiled, a warm smile shining brightly amid the gloomy night. I'm just passing by. Don't worry, I'll get you out of here. Bending down, she grasped the wheelchair with her small hands and began to pull with all her might. The chair jerked but did not budge. Gritting her teeth, she pulled again, this time with greater strength. Dirty water splashed all over her hair clinging to her face. Yet she persisted. Once, twice, then a third time. The girl fell hard, her knee slamming into a puddle with a thud. A pained groan escaped her, but she did not cry out. Instead, she laughed, a clear, bright laugh cutting through the dreary night. Almost there, don't be afraid, she said, rising, brushing off the mud from her hands and continuing to pull. She did not give up, despite trembling hands from the cold and clothes that were drenched and filthy. Her smile was like a small flame, burning brightly against the cold rain. Inside the car, Putin sat up straighter, his hand unconsciously clenching the armrest. He hadn't realized he had been holding his breath for so long. His heart, usually cold and composed, now pounded faster. Something stirred within him, a rare, deep emotion he usually kept buried beneath his hardened exterior. He looked at the girl, then at the boy, and felt something profoundly real, something so familiar that he had long forgotten. The bodyguard, noticing the change, spoke quickly. "Sir, we should move on. It isn't safe here." But the car door had already opened. Putin stepped out, his shiny black shoes hitting the wet pavement. The rain pelted his face, soaking his thick coat, yet he did not care. He advanced steadily toward the pair, his eyes never leaving the girl and the boy. The bodyguard rushed after him, but Putin held up a hand to stop him. "Stay there," he commanded, his tone authoritative yet calm. The bodyguard hesitated, still holding the communication device, his worried eyes fixed on the two vulnerable figures, as if they might be a hidden threat. But Putin paid no mind. He listened only to the sound of the rain and the soft breathing of the two small beings before him, feeling an unfamiliar stirring within. The girl, Anya, though Putin did not yet know her name, stepped back, her hands trembling as she wiped rain from her face. About 20 years old, she was slender, with bright yet weary eyes. Her thin jacket was torn at the sleeves, revealing pale skin beneath, soaked and shivering with cold. The old worn bag lay on the ground, completely saturated, yet she did not pick it up. She only gazed at the man before her with a mix of astonishment and confusion. To her, he was just a kind stranger, a man who had stepped out into the rain to help when no one else would. The boy, Dima, a name that would soon be remembered, sat in the wheelchair, his frail legs dangling helplessly. About 10 years old, small and pale, his large eyes shone with innocence and resilience despite his hardships. His worn-out wheelchair, once a charitable gift 3 years ago, was now battered, its wheels often getting stuck. In the report, it was noted, Olga, his mother, had once applied for local government assistance to buy a new wheelchair, but the request was rejected for lack of funds. Putin's gaze shifted from Dima to Anya. He saw not only the fatigue on her face, but also the strength in her eyes, a strength not born of muscles, but of kindness. Rising, he addressed Dima in a gentler tone. "You're shivering, aren't you? Don't worry, I'll take you home." Dima nodded, his smile returning as he looked at Putin. "You're so strong. I thought no one could help me," he said, his innocent voice ringing like a tiny bell amid the rain. Anya looked at him, gratitude mingling with surprise. "I can't just leave him," she murmured. "He's alone here. If no one helps, he'll be stuck forever." She knelt to pick up her bag, holding it close as if it were a shield. Water dripped from the bag, but she ignored it, only focusing on the boy with gentle eyes. "What's your name?" she asked. "Dima," he replied, his small hands clutching the wheelchair. "I got lost on the way home. I just wanted to go back to my mom, but the chair got stuck and the rain was too heavy." His voice trailed off, not out of fear, but from exhaustion. Anya quickly knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry, I'll take you home." "Where do you live?" Dima hesitated, eyes downcast at his motionless legs. "In the outskirts, but it's far. I lost my way." Then he looked up at Putin. "Do you know the way? I just want to get back to my mom." Putin fell silent for a moment, his gaze shifting from Dima to Anya. He noted the weariness on her face, yet recognized the determination in her eyes. the kind of determination that came not from privilege, but from sheer perseverance. Standing, he spoke with quiet resolve. I will help both of you. He turned to signal the bodyguard still standing in the rain. Come here, he said, no further explanation needed. The bodyguard hurried over, his eyes still filled with concern. Sir, please don't. You can't go out in these conditions, he protested, but the door had already opened. Putin stepped out. Every step he took, his polished shoes splashed through puddles of mud, yet he paid no mind. He commanded the bodyguard to stand aside with an imperious gesture. Stand there, he ordered in a firm voice. The bodyguard obeyed, his hand still tightly holding the device, his eyes anxiously following the pair. He moved through puddles, his expensive shoes now stained with mud, but he did not care. The wind buffeted him, causing his coat to flutter like a cape, yet he pressed on. As he drew near, the girl looked up, her eyes wide with astonishment. She ceased pulling the wheelchair, still gripping it tightly, unable to speak. The boy looked up too, his round eyes sparkling under the dim streetlight. Are you the one? He asked innocently. Putin paused a few steps away, his eyes softening as he addressed the scene before him. The small girl, the frail boy, and the genuine kindness that had emerged amid the relentless rain. He knelt beside the wheelchair, disregarding the grime that had soiled his expensive clothes. With firm hands, he helped lift the old chair, working in tandem with the girl's trembling strength. Mud splattered as the chair was freed. The combined force of two hands, one small and trembling, the other steady and resolute, overcoming the obstacle. The boy's joyful laughter rang out, his gratitude clear in his voice. Thank you, he cried, clutching the wheelchair while his eyes sparkled under the weak streetlights. The girl panted as she straightened up, water streaming down her face, yet her smile remained, a warm glow amid the biting cold. Putin then sat back in the armored car, his eyes on his hands, now still bearing traces of mud and rain. He thought about Anya, about Dima, and about the silent kindness of the people he had just helped, an emotion that stirred deep within him. The bodyguard sat nearby, tense and alert, his eyes constantly darting between the two, as if they were potential threats. But Putin ignored the watchfulness. He listened only to the rain, to the breaths of the two small beings before him. Suddenly, Anya spoke up, her voice small yet clear. My name is Anya. Thank you. I don't know what else to say. She lowered her eyes, clutching her soaked bag tightly. Putin looked at her, his gaze lingering on her trembling hands, her thin fingers red from the cold. No need to thank me, he replied. What made you brave enough to face the rain out there? Anya hesitated before confessing. I just finished my shift at a restaurant. I'm studying here, but I couldn't afford tuition, so I work extra shifts. Last night I had a long shift, and I planned to take the bus home, until I saw him. She turned to Dima with a gentle smile. I couldn't just walk by without helping him. Putin nodded, his eyes softening as he recalled his own hard-fought past. The days of hunger in Leningrad, nights of bitter cold, and a mother who worked tirelessly to feed him. In Anya, he saw echoes of his own childhood, a young woman with nothing but the strength of sacrifice. He then glanced at Dima, the little boy whose smile, despite his hardships, still shone brightly. You're a brave little soul, he said in a warm tone, addressing Dima. Tell me, you live on the outskirts, don't you? Do you know your address? Dima nodded, his eyes brightening. Yes, sir. My house is near an old factory with a big tree in front of it. My mom said if you see the tree, you know you're home. His smile widened, only to fade as he continued. But my mom must be so worried. I was out for so long. Dima's voice trailed off as he lowered his gaze, then looked up at Putin. Do you know the way? I just want to be with my mom. Putin listened silently, his thoughts now echoing memories of his own childhood. Days of hunger, nights of despair, and the fierce determination instilled in him by his mother. He saw in Dima a mirror of the vulnerability and strength he once knew. Without further ado, he turned to the bodyguard and said firmly, Call my assistant. I want to ensure these two are safe tonight. Anya gasped. You don't have to do this, sir, she protested. But Putin's determined gaze left no room for argument. Turning to Dima with a gentler tone, he asked, Is it very cold for you? Don't worry, I'll get you home. Dima nodded again, his small smile returning, exclaiming, "I'm not cold if you help me." Anya, though still surprised, looked at Putin with gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you," she said softly. Putin bent down to help lift the wheelchair, ensuring no one else would have to struggle. Anya ran to the open door of the armored car, while the driver opened the door wider. "No questions," Putin said curtly as he motioned for Dima to be loaded into the car. The bodyguard assisted Dima into the back, neatly folding the wheelchair and placing it in the trunk. Anya hesitated. "I really don't need to go along," she murmured. "He needs to get home and I—" But Putin turned, locking eyes with her. "You're soaked. Come on in. I won't leave you out here alone." His voice was not commanding but caring, a rarity in a man known for his stern demeanor. Anya, though uncertain, nodded as Dima waved from inside. She climbed in, sitting next to the boy, clutching her bag as if it were a shield. Finally, Putin closed the door. Outside, the rain's drumming was cut off by the bulletproof glass. Within the car, an eerie silence prevailed, punctuated only by the soft breaths of the three: a powerful leader, a poor girl, and a frail boy. After a long silence, Anya spoke again, her voice trembling yet sincere. "You really didn't have to do all this, sir." Lowering her gaze to the tightly held bag, she added, "I know you're kind, but I can manage on my own. As long as you get the boy home, that's enough." Putin's eyes softened as he looked at her delicate, trembling hands. "You're tired," he remarked in a gentle tone. "I won't let you stand in the rain any longer, and neither will I let the boy suffer." He turned to Dima in a warm voice. "You live on the outskirts, right? You know your address?" Dima nodded shyly. "Yes, sir. My mom said my house is far away, but I know the way." His voice faltered, not from fear, but exhaustion. Anya quickly knelt beside him, soothingly. "Don't worry, we'll take you home." "Where do you live exactly?" Dima hesitated, then explained in a small voice. "In the outskirts. It's far, and I'm lost." Looking up, he asked, "Do you know the way, sir?" "I just want to be with my mom." His words struck a chord in Putin, a place he seldom allowed himself to feel. For a long moment, Putin was silent, his eyes drifting from the boy to the girl. He saw in her not only exhaustion, but an inner strength, the kind born from hardship. Rising, he spoke with quiet determination. "I will help both of you." He then signaled to the bodyguard still standing under the rain. "Come here." The bodyguard quickly obeyed, though his eyes remained filled with worry. "Sir, I don't think—" he began, but Putin cut him off. "No more questions. Just do as I say." The bodyguard nodded, though his apprehension lingered, and he hurried away. Putin picked up his phone from his coat pocket, his rain-soaked fingers barely noticing as he dialed. "Alexei, I need you right away. Find a clean, warm place near the eastern outskirts. 2 people, a young girl and a disabled boy. Prepare food and dry clothes. Hurry." He didn't wait for a response. Ending the call, he set the phone aside and again gazed out at the rain. The car came to a stop before a modest house, where a warm light glimmered through the rain. Putin stepped out first, allowing the bodyguard to help Dima. Anya followed hesitantly, her steps faltering from fatigue as she clutched her bag. They brought Dima to the armored car where the driver had already opened the door. "Sir?" the driver began, but Putin waved him off. "No questions. Get the boy inside." The bodyguard helped Dima into the back, neatly folding the wheelchair and placing it in the trunk. Anya lingered at the door, her face wet with rain. "I really don't need to come along," she insisted softly. "He needs to get home, and I—" But Putin turned, fixing her with a look. "You're soaked. Get in. I won't let you be left out here alone." His tone was caring rather than commanding, an uncommon quality in a man known for his imperious nature. Anya hesitated, but when Dima waved from within the car, she nodded and climbed aboard. Sitting next to the boy, she clutched her bag as though it might protect her from the cold. Finally, Putin joined them at the rear, closing the door as the rain outside was blocked by the armored glass. Inside, the space fell silent, save for the soft breaths of the three: a powerful leader, a young girl in need, and a fragile boy. "I'm Anya," the girl suddenly introduced herself in a clear, small voice. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what else to say." Lowering her gaze and holding her bag tightly, she seemed overwhelmed by gratitude. Putin looked at her, his eyes lingering on her trembling hands. No thanks are necessary, he replied. What made you go out into the rain like that? Anya hesitated, then sighed. I just finished my shift at a restaurant. I'm studying here, but I couldn't afford proper tuition, so I work extra shifts. Last night, my shift ran late. I planned to catch the bus, but then I saw the boy. She turned to Dima, smiling weakly. I couldn't just ignore him. Putin nodded thoughtfully, his mind drifting back to his own difficult childhood. Days of hunger in Leningrad, bitterly cold nights, and a mother who sacrificed everything to raise him. In Anya, he saw echoes of his own mother's determination, a young woman with little, yet imbued with the strength of sacrifice. Flipping to the next page in his mental report, he learned Dima's story, a 10-year-old boy living on the outskirts of Moscow, whose father had died in a work accident 4 years ago, leaving his mother, Olga, to raise him alone. Dima had been paralyzed in both legs from a high fever that went untreated due to their inability to afford proper care. His old wheelchair, once donated by a charity 3 years ago, was now in disrepair, its wheels often getting stuck. The report stated that Olga had applied for local government support to buy a new wheelchair, but her application was rejected for lack of funds. Putin set the document aside, clenching his fist. He said nothing aloud, yet his eyes darkened with a quiet anger. He thought of Dima, the little boy whose smile had shone despite being trapped in the rain, and of Olga, the mother whose tears of joy masked a constant struggle. He wondered, how could a 10-year-old boy be deprived of the basic necessity of a decent wheelchair? How could a girl like Anya have to endure hunger just to pursue her dream of helping others? Alexei, Putin said, his tone low but sharp, who rejected the mother's support application. Alexei hesitated, quickly scanning the report. Sir, it was the local authorities in the eastern outskirts. They said the budget for this year was exhausted. Putin repeated the words softly. Budget exhausted, his voice nearly a whisper. He rose and moved toward the window, looking out at the sprawling city. A 10-year-old boy without a proper wheelchair, a girl who goes without food in order to study, yet they claim there's no money. Alexei remained silent, unsure of how to respond when Putin's voice carried an undeniable edge. Putin turned back, his eyes now filled not with coldness, but with resolute determination. I want you to do something, he said. Investigate further about them. Not just this report. I want to know who they are, what they need so that they no longer suffer. But keep it secret. They must not know who I am. Alexei nodded firmly. Yes, sir. I'll take care of it right away. Clutching the report, he prepared to leave, but Putin called him back. One more thing, he said. Check on Anya and Dima. Make sure they were well taken care of last night. Alexei nodded once more and left, leaving Putin alone with his thoughts. Sitting back down, Putin's eyes grew distant as he recalled his own childhood. Days of hunger, nights of shivering cold, and the unwavering resilience of his mother. He thought of Anya, the young girl who had knelt in the rain to pull Dima's wheelchair, her hands trembling but her spirit unyielding. He thought of the things that cannot be measured in reports or numbers, but that had affected him deeply that night. Dima's smile, Anya's grateful eyes, the cry of a mother overjoyed to see her child safe. I will get the boy home, he said firmly, turning back to Dima. And you, I'll find you a place to rest tonight. No arguments. Anya wanted to protest, but the firmness in his gaze silenced her. She murmured, Thank you. I don't know how to repay you. No repayment necessary, Putin replied. Living well is enough. Turning to the bodyguard, his tone was firm yet caring. Give these instructions to Alexei. Tell him to act immediately, but let them never know where the help came from. The bodyguard nodded and left. Putin then looked out the window again, his mind heavy with memories. He recalled that rainy night, the night he stepped out of his car, ignoring every caution, to pull Dima's wheelchair from the mud and to take Anya out of the cold. He thought of the days after when he continued to help them without ever revealing his identity. Days passed. Alexei returned in the afternoon with good news. Sir, Anya rested well last night, he reported. She had a warm meal, changed into dry clothes, and slept until morning. The boy, too, the mother stayed with him in the apartment, and they're both happy. They don't know anything about you? Putin nodded, his gaze softening. Good, he said. Anything else? Alexei produced a small note from his pocket and handed it over. This is a letter from the boy's mother, Olga. She wrote this morning, asking that her thanks be conveyed to the kind soul who helped her son. Putin unfolded the paper and read the shaky handwriting. Thank you for helping my child. I don't know who you are, but you have given us hope. I will pray for you every day. Folding the letter carefully, Putin set it on the desk. Though he said nothing, his eyes brightened for a moment, a rare light breaking through his usual reserve. He thought of Olga, of Anya, of Dima, and realized that true strength did not lie in grand policies or power plays, but in the simple kindness that reached into the hearts of those who suffered. He called the bodyguard back, his voice resolute. Start immediately. I want results soon. Alexei bowed and left, leaving Putin alone with his thoughts. He picked up Anya's letter once more, read it slowly and smiled, a small, genuine smile. He knew then that he would not help Anya and Dima just once, but would change their lives permanently. Moscow awoke to a bright, if modest, winter sun as the puddles from last night's rain dried under the tender warmth. In his office, Putin sat by the window, his hands clasped behind him, gazing at a city gradually stirring awake. The dark coat he wore the previous night had been replaced by a clean suit, yet the marks of the rain, the dried droplets on his shoes, the lingering chill on his skin, remained etched in his memory. He had lost little sleep, not because of work, but because images of Anya clutching her bag, Dima smiling in his battered wheelchair, and a mother weeping in joy played ceaselessly in his mind. A gentle knock on the door interrupted his reverie. Come in, he said quietly. Alexei, his trusted assistant in his mid-40s, with a neat appearance and sharp eyes, entered carrying a thin dossier. Sir, I have the information you requested about the girl and the boy, he said evenly. Putin gestured for him to set the dossier on the desk and took a seat. Opening the file, he scanned each line as Alexei waited silently. The first page detailed Anya Petrova, 21 years old, a third-year medical student at a Moscow university. She hailed from a poor rural area in Ukraine, raised solely by her mother and a younger brother. Her father had died when she was young, leaving her mother to support the family through meager farm work. Anya was the hope of her family. Her scholarship to study in Russia was their only chance to escape poverty. Yet the scholarship wasn't enough, and she had to work at a small restaurant, enduring late-night shifts and sometimes sleeping only a few hours before class. She lived in a run-down dormitory with moldy walls and no heating, often going hungry so she could send money home. Putin paused, his gaze lingering on the phrase, going hungry to send money home. Memories of his own childhood, of a mother who worked herself to exhaustion in Leningrad, flashed before him. Anya was no different from his own mother, a young, fragile woman imbued with the strength of sacrifice. He turned to the next page with a heavy heart. There he read about Dima Ivanov, a 10-year-old boy living with his mother on the outskirts of Moscow. His father had died in a labor accident 4 years ago, leaving his mother, Olga, to raise him alone. Dima had been paralyzed in both legs from a high fever that was not treated in time, the tragic consequence of his family's financial hardships. His old wheelchair, donated by a charity 3 years ago, was now in poor condition, its wheels often stuck. The report noted that Olga had sought local government aid for a new wheelchair, but her application was rejected for insufficient funds. Clenching his fists, Putin said nothing, yet his eyes darkened with a quiet fury. He thought of Dima, the small boy with a radiant smile who had been stranded in the rain simply for wanting to help his mother, and of Olga, who had cried with joy upon seeing her son safe, unaware that tomorrow she would still face poverty and hardship. He wondered, how could a 10-year-old be denied even the most basic of needs? A proper wheelchair? How could a girl like Anya have to endure hunger just to pursue her dream of becoming a doctor? Alexei, Putin said in a low, cutting tone, who rejected the mother's application. Alexei hesitated, scanning the dossier once more. Sir, it was the local authorities in the eastern suburbs. They said the budget for this year was depleted. Putin repeated the word slowly. Depleted budget, his voice almost a whisper. He rose and walked over to the window, looking out at the vast city beyond. A 10-year-old boy without a proper wheelchair, a girl going hungry to study, and they say there's no money. Alexei said nothing, unwilling to question Putin's tone. Turning back, Putin's eyes now shone with determination rather than cold indifference. I want you to do something, he said firmly. Look deeper into their lives, not just this report. Find out who they are and what they need so that they no longer have to suffer, but keep it secret. They must never know I'm behind this. Alexei nodded, his voice steady. Yes, sir. I'll get on it immediately. Clutching the dossier, he prepared to leave, but Putin called him back. One more thing. Check on Anya and Dima to ensure they're well cared for. I want to be sure they had a good night. Alexei nodded once more and departed, leaving Putin alone with his thoughts. He sat quietly, his eyes drifting back to memories of his own childhood. Days of hunger, bitter nights, and a mother's relentless sacrifice. He thought of Anya, the young girl who had knelt in the rain to pull Dima's wheelchair, her hands trembling, yet unwavering. He recalled the immeasurable kindness that night, Dima's smile, Anya's grateful eyes, a mother's tearful joy, a kind of measure that no official report could capture. Rising, he moved to his desk, grabbed a sheet of paper and a pen, and wrote swiftly with strong, decisive strokes. Full scholarship for Anya Petrova, unconditional. New wheelchair and urgent medical support for Dima Ivanov. Regular financial aid for the boy's mother. Folding the paper and placing it in an envelope, he called the bodyguard. Hand this to Alexei, he instructed. Tell him to get it done immediately, without revealing the source. The bodyguard nodded and departed. Putin then looked once again out the window, not wanting Anya or Dima to ever know who he was. Not out of fear, but so that his kindness might reach them naturally, untainted by the trappings of power. He wanted them to receive what they deserved, not as a gift from above, but as a reward for their own perseverance and goodness. In the days that followed, Alexei returned with more news. Sir, Dima received the new wheelchair, he reported. The boy is very happy. His mother said he's been pushing it around all morning. Anya has also been able to start a lighter part-time job at the hospital thanks to the charity. They remain unaware of your involvement. Putin nodded, his eyes softening. Good, he said simply. Keep an eye on them. I want to ensure everything remains stable. Alexei left, and Putin sat alone once more. Rising, he stepped out onto his small balcony and looked out over the bustling city. He thought of his own hard times, of his mother, of the people like Anya and Dima, and realized that the true strength of a nation lay not only in power or wealth, but in the resilience and kindness of its people. Returning to his desk, he picked up Anya's letter once more and read it carefully. Someone saved my life, it began. Putin smiled as he folded the letter and set it aside. In that moment, he understood that his actions had sparked a deeper change, not only for Anya and Dima, but for many others like them. He then called out to Alexei in a determined tone, Well done. Keep everything as it is. They must never know who I am. Alexei nodded, but before leaving added, Sir, the charity would like to meet with you to report on progress. They don't know your connection. They assume you're just checking on the routine work. I've arranged a meeting this afternoon, if you agree. Putin nodded. Very well. Prepare the car. Alexei departed, leaving Putin alone with his thoughts. He stepped out onto his small balcony once more, gazing over the city. He thought of Dima, of the new wheelchair that would help him move freely, of the financial aid that would ease his mother's burden, and of Anya, the dream of becoming a doctor that now had a chance to flourish without sacrifice. And he smiled, a small, genuine smile, unseen by others. That very afternoon, Putin visited the charity's office, a modest but tidy building on the outskirts of Moscow. Wearing his long coat and a low-brimmed hat to avoid drawing attention, he entered with the demeanor of someone simply checking on routine work. The head of the charity, an elderly woman named Maria, greeted him with a warm smile. We are honored by your visit, she said kindly. Today we just helped a young medical student. She came to thank the kind soul who helped her, but you arrived just as she was leaving. Putin nodded, his eyes scanning the room. He saw stacks of papers and photographs of grateful recipients on the walls, smiles that he rarely encountered in his official work. What did she say? He inquired softly. Maria smiled and pointed to a small bouquet of wildflowers tied clumsily with an old ribbon on a corner table. She brought these, Maria explained. She said that someone saved her life, and she wanted to express her thanks. She didn't have much money, so she only picked some wildflowers from the street. She also vowed to study hard to help others as a way to repay that kindness. Putin looked at the bouquet, a wave of emotion stirring within him. He thought of Anya, a young woman who had nothing but gratitude and still managed to offer a small gift. Masking his emotions, he nodded to Maria. Good. The charity is doing well. Keep it up. Without lingering, he left, his eyes fixed on the bouquet one last time before departing. On his ride home, he sat quietly in the car. The bodyguard drove, but his eyes in the rear-view mirror betrayed his curiosity. Putin did not notice. His thoughts were with Anya's letter, the wildflowers, and Dima's smile upon receiving the new wheelchair. He thought of Olga, whose worries might be eased by the financial aid, and he resolved that this was the work he wanted to continue, not for accolades or legacy, but to see people like them live better lives. The next day, Alexei brought fresh news. Sir, Dima has been using the new wheelchair, he reported. The boy is very happy. His mother said he's been maneuvering it around the house all morning. Anya has also started working a lighter shift at the hospital, thanks to the charity's arrangements. They remain unaware of your identity. Putin nodded, his eyes brightening slightly. Good, he said. Monitor them closely. I want to be sure no one is left behind. Alexei departed, leaving Putin once again in solitude. He rose, stepped back onto the balcony, and looked down at the city slowly transforming with the morning light. He thought of that rainy night, not only the night he helped Anya and Dima, but the night they changed him. He recalled Dima's smile, Anya's tears, the letter, and the wildflowers. And he realized that his true legacy would not be measured by power or victories, but by moments when kindness became the strongest force of all. Returning to his desk, he picked up a fresh sheet of paper and wrote a short note. For Anya and Dima, keep living well. He folded the paper and placed it in a drawer as a quiet reminder to himself, a reminder he never sent, for he wanted them to succeed without the burden of knowing who was behind it all. Moscow began a new day with a rare, gentle blue sky. The puddles from the previous night's rain slowly dried under the modest warmth of winter's sun. Putin sat in his office, his gaze drifting over towering stacks of reports on economics, military affairs, and politics that he handled daily. Yet today his mind wandered elsewhere, to a young girl struggling to study and a little boy trying to smile despite not being able to walk. He looked out the window, his eyes pensive, his hands now loosely resting on his thighs. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he said in his characteristic deep tone. Alexei entered, neatly dressed in a dark suit, carrying a small envelope. Sir, everything has been arranged, he reported in an even tone, careful not to betray any surprise. The full scholarship for Anya Petrova has been approved through a private charity fund, unconditionally starting this month. The new wheelchair and medical support for Dima Ivanov have also been dispatched, along with a regular stipend for his mother, all done anonymously as you instructed. Putin nodded, his gaze fixed on the envelope in Alexei's hand. Good, he said briefly. Have they received it? Alexei confirmed, Yes, sir. The wheelchair was delivered to Dima's home this morning. His mother, Olga, was informed that it came from a government program for the disabled, and the charity contacted the girl, saying she was randomly chosen from a list of needy students. They have no suspicions. Putin allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. He did not wish for them to ever know that he was behind it, not out of fear, but so that the kindness would come naturally, unclouded by his public identity. He signaled for Alexei to set the envelope on the desk. Anything else? He asked. Alexei hesitated, then said, There is also a letter from Anya. She sent it to the charity this morning, asking them to forward her thanks to the one who helped her. I believe you should read it. Putin frowned slightly and opened the envelope. The letter read, Dear kind soul, I do not know who you are, but I wish to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Today I learned I have been granted a full scholarship, a chance I never dared dream of. I no longer have to work late or go hungry to send money home. I can now focus on my studies to become a doctor and help others as I always longed to. I do not know why you chose me, but I promise I won't let you down. Someone saved my life, and I will use that to do good. Forever grateful, Anya Petrova. Finishing the letter, Putin set it down, his eyes growing somber. He thought of the night when Anya had knelt in the rain to pull Dima's wheelchair, her trembling hands undeterred. He thought of her promise to help others and realized that she now had the opportunity to do so without sacrificing her own well-being. In his heart, he vowed that his actions would extend far beyond one night. They would change lives permanently. "Alexei," he said in a firm yet gentle tone, "you did well. Keep everything as it is. They must never know who I am." Alexei nodded, but before leaving added, "Sir, the charity would like to meet with you for a progress report. They assume you're there on routine duty. I've arranged an appointment this afternoon if you agree." Putin nodded. "Very well, prepare the car." With that, Alexei departed, leaving Putin once again alone with his thoughts. He stepped out onto the balcony, gazing down at the busy city below. He thought of Dima, of the new wheelchair that would free him from his limitations, of the financial aid that would ease Olga's burden, and of Anya, the girl whose dream of becoming a doctor was now attainable without sacrifice. And he smiled, a small, genuine smile unseen by others. The next day, Putin made an unannounced visit to a local school in the outskirts of Moscow, arranged under the guise of routine inspection. There were no cameras, no crowds, just a simple meeting with teachers and students to review the new support program he had recently approved. Wearing his long coat and a low-brimmed hat to avoid attention, he stepped out of the car with the casual demeanor of a visitor. The bodyguard followed, ever alert, though Putin paid him no mind. He only wished to witness firsthand the results of his actions, not just on paper, but in the lives of real people. The school was small, its whitewashed walls faded by time, but the atmosphere inside was vibrant. Laughter rang out from the playground, blending with the teacher's instructions. Putin entered, and the principal, a kindly older man with a gentle smile, welcomed him warmly. "We are honored by your presence," the principal said. "Today is a special day, a small performance by the students. Would you like to see it?" Putin nodded, his eyes drifting down the hall adorned with children's drawings. He took a seat at the back of a modest classroom, where about 20 pupils sat neatly, their curious eyes fixed on him. He listened silently as he surveyed the innocent smiles that he seldom witnessed in his official duties. Suddenly, the sound of a wheelchair's wheels echoed on the wooden floor. A young boy rolled into the classroom, small in stature yet confident, his wide eyes shining brightly. Putin straightened up as his heart skipped a beat. It was Dima, now healthier, no longer pale as he had been on that rainy night, his face flushed with vitality and his smile radiant. The new wheelchair, gleaming and robust, moved smoothly across the floor, a stark contrast to the old one that had once been mired in mud. Dima stopped in the middle of the class and waved at the teacher, his clear voice announcing, "I'm here." The teacher applauded softly, signaling for the class to listen as Dima began to recount his story. "I want to tell you about a kind soul," he began, his small voice steady. "There was a night when my wheelchair wouldn't move in the rain. I was cold and scared, but then a man and a woman came and helped me. The man was so strong, he pulled my chair out of the mud, and the woman smiled at me, telling me not to be afraid. They took me home, and later—" Dima paused as his smile widened. "I got a new wheelchair, and my mom said someone kind sent it. I'm better now, and I can go to school again. I don't know who they were, but I'm very grateful." The classroom burst into applause and laughter. Putin sat quietly, his hands clenched on the chair as he continued to watch Dima. He listened intently to every word, his heart swelling with an emotion he rarely allowed himself. Memories of that rainy night, the little boy clutching his wheelchair, the smile that followed rescue, filled him. And now the boy stood before him, healthier and happier, all because of the help he had given silently. Then Dima's eyes searched the room until they met Putin's. With a slight frown as if trying to recall, he shouted, "Are you the man from the rain? The one who helped me?" The room fell silent. The principal and teacher looked on in astonishment, yet Dima paid them no mind. He rolled his wheelchair up to Putin, his eyes shining. "You really are the one, aren't you? You helped me that night." Putin paused, meeting Dima's clear, sincere gaze. Unsure what to say, he had never wished for them to know. He was caught off guard by the little boy's earnestness. But Dima's smile, so full of pure gratitude, melted his resolve. He managed a gentle smile and said in a warm tone, "You have a good memory." "Yes, that was me." Dima cheered, clapping his hands on the wheelchair. "I knew it. I tell my mom all the time that you're like an angel." The class laughed, but Putin only looked at the boy with tenderness. He stooped and placed a hand on Dima's shoulder, asking softly, "How is the new wheelchair?" "It's great," Dima replied, spinning his chair to show off. "I can go much faster now, and my mom is so happy. She doesn't worry as much." Putin nodded, a rare glimmer of warmth in his eyes. The teacher stepped forward, hesitantly. "Sir, we didn't know you were—" Putin waved his hand to cut her off. "No need to say anything," he said. "I'm just here to see how you all are doing." As he turned to leave, a different voice called out from the classroom door. Are you him?" Anya asked, stepping forward. Putin looked back, and his heart skipped a beat. There she was, Anya, now in a white blouse of a medical intern, holding a small first aid kit. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she recognized him. She approached slowly, her voice trembling. "Were you the one that night? The man who pulled Dima out of the rain?" Putin looked at her, his gaze softening even further. In her expression, he saw a transformation, a spark of hope replacing her earlier guarded look. "Anya," he said in a deep, measured tone, "I'm glad you're well." Anya hesitated, tears welling in her eyes, and then rushed forward to embrace him, choked with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. You saved us that night, not just then, but even after. The scholarship, the job, it's all because of you, isn't it?" Putin stood still, unaccustomed to such intimate closeness, yet he did not push her away. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said quietly, "Do not cry. I only did a small thing. It is you and the boy who have the strength." Anya stepped back slightly, wiping her tears, a faint smile appearing on her face. "You don't understand. You gave me a chance to live, to help others. I will never forget you," Dima interjected in his small, clear voice. "You're amazing. Did you help my sister too?" Putin chuckled, a genuine, rare laugh. "I only helped a little. You both have the power to do so much more on your own." He looked at Anya, then Dima, realizing that moments like these gave him more meaning than any political victory. The principal approached hesitantly. "Sir, we—" But Putin raised his hand once more. "No more words. Just let the children learn well." Then turning to Anya and Dima in a gentle tone, he said, "Live well. That is how you thank me." Anya nodded, tears still streaming, yet her smile brighter than before. Dima waved excitedly, shouting, "I'll study hard to make you proud." Putin then left the classroom, stepping out into the schoolyard, where the sunlight caught the dew on the playground. He did not look back, yet the echoes of Dima's laughter and Anya's choked words lingered in his heart. Climbing into his car, he sat silently, his gaze drifting out the window as the school and its laughter receded into the distance. In that moment, he realized that the images of Dima in his new wheelchair and the warm gratitude in Anya's voice had peeled away the hardened layers he had built around himself. Even the bodyguard, who had observed him from the rearview mirror, showed a curious, silent admiration. For the first time in years, Putin's hands, once always clenched, now rested loosely on his thighs as if a great burden had finally been lifted. Later, inside his office building, a large structure where daily decisions shaping the nation were made, Putin stepped off the elevator without letting the bodyguard open the door. He walked up the steps slowly and paused in the corridor, looking out through a large window at the bustling city below. He thought back to that rainy night, the night he stepped out of his car despite all warnings, the night he pulled Dima's wheelchair from the mud and took Anya out of the cold. He recalled the subsequent days when he continued to help them without revealing his identity, all for the sake of their dignity and well-being. Footsteps approached from behind. Alexei appeared, carrying a thin dossier. In a measured tone, he said, "Sir, I have a new report on Anya and Dima. The girl is now volunteering at the hospital and excelling in her studies. The boy attends school regularly, and his health has markedly improved. His mother has also sent her thanks through the charity, though she remains unaware of your involvement." Putin nodded, his eyes returning to the window. "Good," he said in his steady tone, "as long as they are well." Alexei then added, "Sir, there's one more matter. The support program for the disabled and underprivileged students, whose budget you requested be increased, has been finalized. They're awaiting your final approval." Putin turned back, a rare light in his eyes. Stepping to the desk, he took the dossier and skimmed through the detailed plans. Free wheelchairs, scholarships for struggling students, medical support for impoverished families. details he had once considered minor compared to grander policies. Now, however, he saw in every figure and plan the face of Dima, the hope of Anya, and the relief in Olga's eyes. Placing the documents down, he stated firmly, "Approve it immediately. Double the budget. I want to see results by the end of the month." Alexei, taken aback, replied, "Sir, doubling the funds is a huge step. There might be objections from the departments." But Putin interrupted, his tone unwavering. "I don't care. Make it happen. If anyone objects, they can come see me." Alexei nodded in submission and hurried off to execute the orders. Left alone again, Putin returned to his window, his thoughts now turning to his own childhood. Days of hunger in Leningrad, nights of freezing cold when his mother had used burning paper for warmth, meals of nothing but dry bread. He had once lived as Anya did, once felt as fragile as Dima, and once relied on the kindness of others to survive. And now, holding the reins of power, he could do what his mother never could. Help people like them, not just once, but forever. The next day, as he prepared to deliver an unplanned speech before high-ranking officials, Putin took the stage with a sincere tone that none had expected. Standing at the podium, his eyes swept over a room full of stern faces accustomed to his usual hardened rhetoric. But today his voice was different, deep and warm, full of compassion. "We often think that the strength of a nation lies in its weaponry, its money or its power," he began, his eyes alight with an uncommon fervor. "But I have learned something else. Sometimes true strength is found in the kindness of people, not only the kindness we give, but the kindness we receive from those who are most vulnerable. I have seen a girl go without food to study, a boy smile despite his inability to walk, and a mother cry tears of joy when her child is safe. They have little, yet they have taught me that kindness is something no one can take away." The room fell silent. No one dared interrupt. They had never heard Putin speak with such emotion, with such genuine compassion. He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience, and continued, "We must do more, not only for the powerful, but for those who are the weakest. That is how we build a truly strong nation." After finishing his speech, he stepped down without waiting for applause. Returning to his office, he sat by the window once more, his thoughts filled with images of Anya, Dima, and countless others he had helped silently. He kept their story to himself, not to hide it, but to let it remain a quiet flame burning in his heart. Later, Alexei entered with more news. "Sir, the budget has been approved," he announced. "The programs will begin next week. Thousands will receive support. Wheelchairs, scholarships, medical care." Putin nodded, his voice calm. "Good. Monitor them closely. I want to ensure no one is left behind." Alexei left, and Putin stepped out onto the balcony again, looking over the city in transformation. He thought of that rainy night, not just the night he helped Anya and Dima, but the night they changed him. He recalled Dima's smile, Anya's tearful gratitude, the wildflowers and the letter. And he recognized that his true legacy would be measured not by power or victories, but by those moments when kindness proved to be the greatest strength. Returning to his desk, he picked up a fresh sheet of paper and wrote a brief note. "For Anya and Dima, keep living well." Folding it carefully, he placed it in a drawer as a reminder to himself, a reminder he never intended to send, for he wanted them to succeed on their own merits.